You're standing barefoot in tall grass at dawn. The dew is cold against your skin. Somewhere beneath the blades, coiled and still, something is watching the heat coming off your ankle. You take one more step, and then you feel it. 2 points of pressure. Quick, almost gentle. Not a sting, a puncture. For most of human history, that moment was a death sentence. Not eventually, not maybe. Statistically, often within hours. Here's the disruption. Today, with hospitals, antivenom, and helicopters, snakebites still kill an estimated 81,000 to 138,000 people every single year, according to the World Health Organization. That's with modern medicine. Now subtract every hospital, subtract every vial of antivenom, subtract every ambulance. That was the world your ancestors lived in, for over 300,000 years of Homo sapiens history, with nothing but grass, fire, and each other. And yet they survived. Not always. But often enough that entire cultures built elaborate systems of knowledge just to beat the odds. This is the story of how humans, armed with nothing but observation and desperation, figured out how to outlive one of nature's oldest weapons, and what it reveals about how fragile and how resourceful your species has always been. Start in Egypt, sometime around 450 BCE. In a temple archive, a scribe is copying a document that scholars now call the Brooklyn Papyrus, named after the museum that eventually acquired it in the 1930s. The text itself claims to draw on medical knowledge far older, possibly reaching back over 1,000 years before that copy was made. It is, as far as historians can tell, the oldest surviving medical document dedicated entirely to snake bites. The papyrus doesn't read like folklore. It reads like a field manual. It catalogs specific snakes by appearance, describes the exact symptoms of each bite, swelling, fever, bleeding from the gums, paralysis, and then does something remarkably clinical. It sorts each case into will live or will die. No moralizing. No prayers to appease an angry god. Just triage. If you were bitten by certain vipers, the text essentially tells the healer not to waste resources. If you were bitten by something else, it lists interventions. Cutting, cauterizing, herbal poultices, some of which modern toxicologists believe may have had mild antiseptic value. This was, in essence, humanity's first attempt to turn snakebite survival into a science instead of a superstition. But Egypt wasn't the only civilization confronting this problem, and some cultures didn't just want to treat the bite, they wanted to become immune to it entirely. Head north and west, across the Mediterranean, to a tribe the Romans called the Scilli, native to a stretch of North Africa near modern-day Libya. Writers like Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, completed around 77 CE, and the poet Lucan, writing about a century later, described the Scilli in terms that sound less like ethnography and more like myth. They claimed the tribe's blood itself was toxic to snakes. They claimed Scilli warriors could suck venom from a wound with their bare mouths and suffer no harm. They even claimed the tribe tested the legitimacy of their own newborns by placing them in baskets with venomous snakes. If the infant was truly Scilli blood, the story went, the snake would do nothing. Strip away the myth, and something more interesting is likely underneath it. Modern toxinologists suspect the Scilli weren't magically immune. They were probably practicing something closer to repeated, controlled exposure, a crude, dangerous form of what we'd now call mithridatism, building tolerance through small, survivable doses over time. It's also likely their reputation did real work for them. Fear and mystique were currency. If enemies and neighbors believed you couldn't be poisoned, they were less likely to test that belief with a blade. The Scilli may have been running one of history's earliest successful medical brands, built on a mixture of technique, theater, and nerve. But here's where it gets stranger. One ruler took the Scilli's underlying idea and pushed it to an extreme that still puzzles pharmacologists today. His name was Mithridates VI, King of Pontus, a region along the Black Sea in what is now northern Turkey. He ruled from around 120 to 63 BCE, and he had a very specific, very rational fear. His own family had a habit of assassinating each other with poison. So Mithridates, according to ancient sources including the historian Pliny, began a lifelong experiment on his own body. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Training his system to tolerate what would kill an untrained person outright. He didn't stop there. He is credited with commissioning a compound antidote now known as mithridatium, a mixture said to contain dozens of ingredients, designed as a universal shield against toxins of every kind, including snakebite. The recipe was taken seriously enough that physicians were still referencing and refining versions of mithridatium over 1,700 years later, well into the European Renaissance. The most famous postscript to his story is almost too neat to be true. When Mithridates was finally cornered by his own son's rebellion and wanted to end his life by poison, legend holds that his body had built up so much tolerance that the poison failed to kill him. He reportedly had to ask a soldier to run him through with a sword instead. Historians debate how much of this is embellishment layered on by later writers, but the core practice, deliberate, incremental self-immunization, wasn't nonsense. It's a real, documented biological principle, and versions of it are still studied today in toxicology. That's not the whole story, though, because immunity, real or exaggerated, was only useful to kings and mystics with the time and resources to experiment on themselves for years. For most people, hunter-gatherers, farmers, soldiers on the march, there was no decade to spend microdosing venom. When the bite happened, it happened now, and what people did in that first hour often mattered more than any long-term strategy. This is where folk technique took over, and where the archaeological and ethnographic record gets genuinely fascinating. Across wildly different cultures with no contact with each other, the Kalahari Desert, the Amazon Basin, the deserts of Australia, you find strikingly similar first response instincts. Immobilize the limb, apply pressure, keep the person as still as possible. Movement, they seem to understand intuitively, sped the venom's spread through the body. That intuition turned out to be scientifically sound. In 1978, an Australian medical researcher named Struan Sutherland formalized this ancient instinct into what's now called the pressure immobilization technique, firmly wrapping the entire bitten limb, then splinting it to prevent motion, which slows lymphatic movement of venom toward the heart. It's still recommended by Australian health authorities today for bites from many of the country's notoriously venomous elapid snakes. In other words, a life-saving medical protocol formalized in the late 20th century had already been practiced, in some form, by Aboriginal Australians for possibly tens of thousands of years before Sutherland ever picked up a bandage. Not every traditional method aged as well. Cutting an X into the wound and sucking out the venom by mouth, a technique depicted in old films and even some old military manuals, is now known to do almost nothing. Venom moves into the lymphatic system far too quickly for suction to meaningfully remove it, and the practice risks infecting the wound further. Tourniquets, too, once common, are now understood to be a double-edged intervention, sometimes helpful in narrow circumstances, sometimes catastrophic, capable of concentrating venom so intensely in a limb that when the tourniquet is finally released, the resulting surge can be more dangerous than the original bite. So ancient humans weren't right about everything. They were running enormous, uncontrolled experiments across countless generations, refining technique through trial, error, and death. What's remarkable isn't that they had perfect answers. It's that, working purely from observation, without microscopes, without any concept of toxins as molecules, entire independent cultures converged on genuinely correct core principles: stillness, pressure, restriction of movement, through nothing but repeated experience with loss. Except there was a problem no amount of technique could fully solve. The human body itself never evolved strong natural defenses against most snake venoms. And that fact becomes even stranger when you look at your fellow mammals. Take the honey badger, an animal whose resistance to snake venom is well documented by field researchers observing its willingness to prey on venomous snakes and survive bites that would kill a similarly sized mammal. Or the Virginia opossum, which carries a specialized protein in its blood. Researchers have identified peptides in opossum serum capable of neutralizing venom from multiple snake species, a discovery that's actually driven real pharmaceutical research into synthetic antivenoms. The mongoose, too, has mutations in its nerve receptors that block certain neurotoxins from binding effectively. Humans got none of this. No specialized blood protein. No mutated receptor. Some population genetics research has explored whether specific human groups living for millennia in snake-dense regions show any adaptive signatures in genes related to blood clotting or immune response, but the evidence remains thin and contested. Nothing close to the robust, evolved resistance seen in opossums or honey badgers. Which means every single ancient human who survived a serious venomous bite survived largely through behavior, not biology. Through technique, timing, herbal intervention, and often plain luck, not through any built-in shield your body was given by evolution. That vulnerability is precisely what pushed the final piece of this story into existence. The piece that finally gave humans something closer to a real biological answer. In 1895, at the Institut Pasteur in France, a scientist named Albert Calmette, building on immunology techniques pioneered by his colleague Émile Roux, developed the first true antivenom. Calmette's method echoed Mithridates' instinct by pure coincidence of logic, but applied it correctly. Instead of injecting a person with slowly increasing doses of venom, he injected animals, horses, with venom, harvested the antibodies their immune systems produced in response, and used that serum to treat bitten patients. It worked. It's still, in modified and far more refined forms, the basic principle behind antivenom production today, well over a century later. For the first 99.9% of the roughly 300,000 years Homo sapiens has existed, none of that existed. There was no serum, no horse-derived antibody, no hospital drip. There was only the accumulated, hard-won memory of what had worked the last time somebody in the tribe was bitten, carried forward, generation after generation, by word of mouth, ritual, and fear. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Every day is a chance to be your best self. Thousands of years of people who did not have that luxury, who watched, who guessed, who occasionally got it catastrophically wrong, and who slowly, painfully, built the knowledge that eventually became medicine. Your safety isn't a natural state of the world. It's the residue of an old, quiet war most of us have simply forgotten was ever being fought.